We are, as usual, lighting the candle, a world that works. I'm Bill Carell, and I'm here at the moment with my dear friend Lisa Sheehan. And we're just being joined by Ken Caputo, who is coming on the call as well. Hi, Ken.
Hello.
We're just getting rolling here. So everyone's smiling. We're having a great day. It's beautiful outside. I mean, it's really a good day, you know. But the other thing that's kind of interesting, we almost never talk about world events and that sort of thing, but today might be worthwhile to just sort of investigate the different kinds of emotional responses to the fact that this is 9/11 today. It is we're actually what 22 years on from the twin towers coming down. And I think this is one of those types of events. I mean, when Kennedy was shot, I know exactly where I was. I know exactly who I was with for the rest of the day and how that all went down. And for me, this is just one of those kinds of uh, events that happen in the world that, yes, I do know exactly where we were, what we were doing. And the nice part of it is to quietly being reached out to by so many folks that are friends, just acknowledging what today is. So there's another aspect to 9/11 for me as well, because believe it or not, 9/11 2015, my building was broken into over on Club Road, and they pretty much cleaned the place out and ransacked it. So I think the interesting thing about all of that is that when I say these things out loud right at the moment, they're really not attached to any sort of an emotional, uh, visceral kind of a feeling for me anymore, which I think is a good thing. It's just something that happened, along with all the things that I forgot happened, except for they happen to be stapled to this date on the calendar. Now, in the meantime, there's a lot to be positive and optimistic about, I say. So we can either put a cap on this conversation and move on to something else, or if both of you or one of you would like to share something or just maybe say something about how this date on the calendar lands for you personally. I know there'll be some people out there that would want to hear what you have to say.
Well, I don't know anybody. Well, I'm sure a lot of people watched 60 Minutes last night because the full hour was on the FDNY on that day and recapping the entire day's events and looking at the survivors and those that are, because it's such a family occupation in New York, where it's fathers and sons and even daughters are all part of the fire department. And one son was in college to be something else entirely, and when that lost his father, decided to join the fire department. So I mean, it bubbled up everything again by watching that. I cried for an hour. It's, and you just remember, and they just, I just was reading somebody. I didn't get to, because the poem was recorded and not written, so I didn't get to read it, and I didn't have time to listen to it. But they had, one of those pictures with and they were talking about a couple that, or a man and a woman, they don't know who they were, that were holding hands as they jumped from the building, and just like things like that, just bring it all bubbling back to the surface, like I said. So,
well, personally, I appreciate hearing about this. I was watching tennis last night while 60 Minutes was going on, which was a little bit of a one-sided battle as well. Ken?
Actually, I there's a lot of stories like that are, incredibly empowering about, who humans can be in difficult times, and I think that's what always struck me is, and I remember there's some social scientist type person saying that a lot of people think that like if there were an apocalypse, that everybody would become isolated and it would be like, survival of the fittest. And that's actually not historically what happens. People come together, they actually form communities, and that can work together to survive whatever it is. And he referenced the story from 9/11 of all of the privately owned boats that got to the island to transport people safely out of the area. And I mean, hundreds of just all kinds of just random, fishing boats and luxury boats. And I don't even know, but they all just decided to help, and, and of course, first responders, were incredible in what they did, and they were trained for it, like that was their job. So here at the same time, you have people with no skills, just a boat, something that would take people out of the area and across the water, and they just all rallied and did exactly that. So, and I think that, most likely, if you were to dig into it, there are a tremendous amount of stories of, in the most difficult of situations, people doing what's best for others, not necessarily what was best for themselves. I think there was probably a lot of that, so I just find that very empowering overall as especially when we forget those things as humans. And, there can be a lot of messaging that makes us feel like we're all in conflict and polarized, and that's not necessarily true.
I agree with you. It's one of those. There are literally thousands of individual stories that got told in the time directly after 9/11, and then the subsequent 20 years. There's still things that we're hearing about. And all of us had friends who either worked at one of the two towers, or lived in the vicinity, or worked at one of the other buildings that was also affected, in that almost 15 square block area. The Tunnel to Towers program that was started after this firefighter, I think, who was in Brooklyn, or he was on the other side of the river, and he ran through the Lincoln Tunnel, I believe, and ran all the way to the towers after the first one had been struck. And he actually got there in time to race up the stairwell in the second tower before it was hit, and actually he saved some people and went back in again. And then subsequently that tower fell down. And it's just such a moving story. Again, Ken, it's like when disaster strikes, people who have skill sets, they have habits to do certain things. And the the ad hoc Navy that forms after this sort of thing. It's like the Katrina Cajun Navy that these people just went around and saved human beings until they both ran out of gas, and and just dropped. They never gave a thought of themselves. And I'm not sure that this current generation or the current culture has a up close and personal experience with any of these sorts of things that we've gone through in our lifetime. And there's an old saying that nothing but good comes from bad things. And I think that's kind of based on the mentality that if you're always optimistic and looking to do good, the fact that something bad happened isn't going to stop you. In many cases, it just accelerates the effort and the energy. We had a close family member um, who we found out was not there, who was sick at home in Brooklyn. And we also had a really good friend of the family that my two girls grew up and went through school with and worshiped and were acolytes at St. Paul's Episcopal Church together, who always wanted to be a firefighter. That was his intention. He graduated from high school, I believe, in 1999, and was in college and made his decision to drop out of college and go be a firefighter in Manhattan, in New York. And he's been there for this past 20 some years. He's a wonderful man. So, Lisa, getting activated by both the stories and the images and the sounds. Even though we weren't there, we were there, weren't we?
And I keep thinking about, you know, the statement, I think it was Mr. Rogers that said, look for the helpers.
Yeah.
To get through such bad stories and stuff like that. So, I mean, and that's what, like Ken was saying, you know, we do come together, and those are the things that probably made me cry almost as much as is watching what
Yes.
people did for each other without any concern for themselves. Just such selflessness at that time is really what I carried away with it too.
Yeah.
I don't it's odd because I didn't even really think of what didn't come to mind was the terrorist aspect of it. You know, I just watched a tragedy and watched things that unfolded because of it. So fortunately it didn't bring up that anger or resentment, I guess. Just the sadness and the hope, I think, is what stayed with me, or came back to me, I should say.
Yeah. Well, it seems like it might be appropriate just to have a moment of silence, you know, in memory of all those that participated and all those that were traumatized by not participating. And also to be mindful of the people who have a hard time understanding what we mean, you know, by how traumatizing it was, to be aware that it was happening and to feel like wherever we were, that things will never be the same. And we went from being what I always used to like to say, being fat, dumb, and happy, just going through our lives on a routine basis, not being concerned about being safe. It was missing that it was missing that we might not be safe. So it's something that experience alone will give you in your body. But I also want to have this moment of silence be for the people who have a hard time understanding what we're talking about. Okay, thank you. So now what?
Well, I would like to add that a few weeks ago I went to Chicago for the Parliament of World's Religions, and there were 10,000 people there of all different religions, and one of the biggest representations was the Sikh pop, and they actually provided lunch to everyone every day for free. Um, that was their act of service. And now with 9/11 being here, it reminded me of how much they were terrorized themselves after 9/11 because of what they wore, basically, because they wear turbans. And I first got introduced to Valley. Her last name is Kaur. I can never pronounce it correctly, but she did an awesome TED talk about living through that horror of being an American and not being able to grieve because they were being attacked. And that just stuck with me.
Yeah.
But another thing that I got at the Parliament was that the International Day of Peace is September 21st, and all it is to pray for not 7 minutes from 9 a.m. to 9:07 a.m. in your own way, whatever way you want. And the power of people doing it at the same time has been proven to heal and do other things. And so, you know, if everybody wants to just mark that on their calendars for September 21st at 9 a.m. to just pray for those 7 minutes.
Whenever a lot of people do the same thing, it can be very, very powerful. If for no other reason, just for a little bit of time, there's no dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for sharing that. Was there a kind of a message, overall, to the time that you spent there? Did you come away with a sense that there are some real optimistic days coming in the future for organized religion?
Definitely. I mean, the focus was climate and equality. So, there was a lot of serious talks there. Um, and then some kind of uplifting ones because they gave an award to Reverend Jesse Jackson, who was actually there, which was kind of cool. But the conversations, there's so many workshops and so many people coming together, and a lot of dyads. You broke out into teams or pairs, but to see that many people, I mean, it sounds silly, but when I got to my hotel and I saw turbans, I was excited. It's like, yay, the Sikhs are here. And then there's female monks roaming around and all different garbs. There's even wizards there, from the Wicca. So it was kind of interesting. And I mean, it was very interesting. And just, we had breakfast in our hotels. So all different people were sharing breakfast with us, sitting together. And then never mind during the Langer, which is the lunch that the Sikhs provided, because you would sit on the floor and then you'd have to have your head covered too. So they would do that for you as well. But, and you're just sitting next to all different people. And it's just an amazing feeling to be that connected, that close, that unafraid. It's just, I don't know. It's hard to describe, and I would recommend it. They haven't actually announced where the next one is, but it's not annually. It's never annually, but we'll see where the next one is. But yeah, climate and equality was the main focus.
Did you come away with any new thoughts or new understandings with regard to the conversation around climate?
I don't have. I mean, I'm trying to think if I have any new thoughts about it. I mean, it was more because there's a lot of also indigenous people. So, the grandmothers of the Native Americans spoke a lot, and just to pay attention to go back to the simpler things of the planet, the ways of the planet, the ways of being one with Mother Nature. We are not here to dominate. We are another species on the planet. We are not the controllers of it. So, I mean, I've always kind of felt that way, and then just to have it reinforced, and just the level of passion that they have for trying to protect her, and that we may not survive, but she will.
She always has, hasn't she?
Yeah. So, do what we may, but I'd rather work towards saving it, saving us, I should say.
Her, the cockroaches, and Keith Richards. That's. I think that's. Yeah. Go ahead, Ken.
I was going to say is regarding that, I've always liked just you take it out of some of the debates, whether it's the political or the scientific or whatever, and you just think about, treatment of nature. Like I just flashed on, if you go to the Ropes Park in Storrs, Connecticut, the adventure park there, And, so you got all these ropes courses suspended from the trees, and there is not one nail in a single tree. It's all done using ropes where they're trying to, limit any harm to the environment in the way that they do it. They're trying to make it one with the environment, part of the environment. And I mean, yes, you could just leave the trees alone, but as humans, we're going to interact just like any, a woodpecker is going to bang a hole through a tree to make its nest. It's so there's, it's hard to do no harm, but just the I think it's just a mindset of how do we how do we balance any harm that we may cause intentionally instead of justifying the decisions we make because it's beneficial on one side or the other. you know don't do this because it's better for the earth even if it's harmful for people, or you know don't do that because it's harmful to the so it's just thinking in terms of balance and as best we can kind of being part of the rhythm instead of an invasive species.
I like what you're saying an awful lot. And I think, if nothing else, until you get the government involved in mandating things, uh, and when you have a kind of a cultural shift to where people are intentionally building their futures and their businesses, being mindful that what they do can have an impact on the global uh, community and on Mother Earth as well. And when they start operating in that way, it's kind of like the old "quality is free" in the 1970s, where they talk about all of the things that are unplanned mishaps in the manufacturing cycle are because no one sat down and said, we're going to account for that in the planning process. So the rework operations and the scrap and the waste and all the rest of that was along the same lines as clearing, the road to the west, knocking trees down, trying to get, connectivity between different cities with railroads. The goal was completely devoid of any thinking about what is the cost to future generations. And I really love that saying. There's an indigenous saying that basically goes, we do not leave this planet to our children. We borrow this from the good graces of our great grandchildren. It's not ours to leave. It's ours to be stewards of.
I think it's also interesting just when you think about, you know, the like the if everyone agreed and abided by the need to drive safely, you wouldn't need speed limits posted. So like, but there are bad actors. People will behave badly. So we're constantly trying to balance, you know, the belief that people will make the right decisions with the fact that many people won't, and then we all pay the consequences for that. So I'm willing to drive safely and someone else isn't, and they kill me and my family, and that could have been prevented if societally we'd taken steps to hold them accountable for behaving badly. So it's like this constant tug of war between, our our individual sovereignty with our responsibility towards the safety and needs of the group. And you're speaking to it multi-generationally now. So now you're talking about people that aren't even born yet, and you're asking people to behave appropriately when they're going to be dead long before it's a problem. So that's it's a it's complicated, when you deal with just human nature being what it is.
Sure. You're familiar with Stephen Covey's saying, in cultures of a sufficient uh, strength, laws are not necessary. But once that strength falls below 95%, laws are unenforceable. So there's no behavior that's ever stopped by a law. There's only the cultural training from the time people are raised and corrected and supported. And it's a different kind of an approach in terms of thinking about accountability as an individual as opposed to accountability from from the outside, from the culture. And rarely, even the worst repeat criminals, the amount of time that they spend in their lifetime doing bad things is moments. So it's the act and the action as opposed to whether or not they're fundamentally bad human beings or they just get into a situation where they make poor choices and they drink and they drive and they kill people, something of that nature. Do you remember what it was like going through the 60s when we had these national campaigns? Please, please don't be a litter bug because every litter bit helps, right? And magically, without people cleaning up, they just started not to get dirty with trash and people throwing whole bags of garbage and a McDonald's bag out the window when they were done with it. Then something happened in the 80s and early 90s where people just weren't on board any longer. There was a new generation that just never got the memo. So then we had, the keep a mile of highway clean, and then organizations would go out and clean it up, but we still didn't address the root problem was who's throwing their stuff out the window of their car. We should probably just have a little chat with them and ask them if they think this is really a sustainable move or if it's even good for them in the long run. I don't know.
And then you wonder, like, I think a lot about with that kind of stuff scale. So how many people were driving in the 60s? How many people, like, were there a lot of drive-through restaurants? Billions weren't served by McDonald's. How many, bags of stuff were piling up in the back seats of people's cars? Was that part of it? And, and we all have ignorance. So, we may not be aware of the consequences. So then people become aware, and now how do you hold accountable people who are indifferent to the larger consequence and are just going to, I just keep using the term behaving badly, but they're just going to litter no matter what. So what do you do with them? It's like someone who's unsafe in driving. There's got to be, in this day and age now, you knock on the wrong door and someone shoots you in the head. So, so how are we going to self police if you see someone doing something inappropriate? People now have a lot of fear to, as a community, say, hey, knock it off. We live in a different world than we did 50 years ago, as far as, the way people interact with each other and the levels of tension that they're under. So, so I just find it interesting. Like finding that balance between the necessity of a framework of law and rules that have consequences and people who enforce it on behalf of the rest of the community that wants to be able to do other things with their lives that are also beneficial. So, if I'm running around policing my neighbors, how do I get to do my work? So it's like, and we're dealing at just a much larger scale now.
Well, there's that, and then there's the if you are requiring too much behavioral acknowledgement and accountability by just a very tiny group of people. You figure, nationwide, what have we got? All in, we used to have like 1.1 million police officers in the United States, maybe 5 years ago. I had heard recently we were down under 800,000. That there are just that many fewer people that are willing to go and put the uniform on and take the pledge. But in the meantime, it starts from day one, all the way through school, all the way through, working, at the job, where people have to have enough self-valuation and have enough feeling about their own contribution to a valuable society, something that's bigger than themselves, as opposed to something that we're constantly tearing down and saying isn't good for people. It's absolutely wrong. And so you only need a few percent of people to behave badly for it to really look like it's completely out of control. And at the same time, except for the things that we see on YouTube and in the news, most people aren't experiencing any of that stuff. They're aware that stuff is happening. They're aware that if you go downtown Denver or Los Angeles or Portland or New York City, you're going to find thousands of tents, but they have no ken. I mean, there's just no way they can get their mind wrapped around what that might look like until they've actually been there and experienced it. And I think that's where we are, is that the tipping point between having a culture that has unenforceable laws because there's just not enough people. You'd have to deputize half of the population, because we literally do give half the population matches and the other half fire extinguishers, and let the games begin. So while we're talking today, oftentimes, in order for people to be upset, they don't have to have had any experience with an upsetting action or an upsetting occurrence. They only have to know it's possible. Kind of like the old days when we used to go to Walt Disney World, happiest place on earth, kids of all ages, all that good stuff. And now people don't feel comfortable going to theme parks in the way that they used to. There's really special talk about how to behave and how to stay together with your group and how to make sure that everyone that you're with always knows where you are. And that has less to do with Walt Disney World and more to do with what's going on outside of Walt Disney World. And it's probably not, a really widespread thing. It's just, we seem to be hearing more and more about it these days.
So my question with that is that, could that also fall under the category of being inflated? Like, if you were to literally poll every person that went into Disney World for a year, are they feeling like it's changed that much? There are too many rules, there's too much, caution, or are they fine with it? Do they feel safer, or do they not even notice? Are they indifferent? So, because you hear those things inflated as well and promoted as being, my curiosity would be, are they as big a problem as some people would like it to seem? So it feels like there are amplifications of everything. So whether you have the match or the fire extinguisher, there's an implication of the fact that everybody got those. And my question would be, is 80% of people just take them and stick them in a room and ignore them?
Yeah,
But then the few people that do, it's like blowing up. It's like, oh, the homelessness thing. And I understand there are areas where that's really bad, but then what does that mean? And what is the actual underlying issue? And what are the conversations being had? Like, someone told me that $20 billion would cure homelessness in the US. Forever, it would be gone. $20 billion. So, and I don't know I have no idea where that number came from, but what I don't hear is a conversation about, if that's true, how do we explore that as an idea that as a community we make a reality? All I hear about is, the cities and the policies and how bad it is, or how you have to be more tolerant and sensitive. Like, people are talking about a symptom instead of thinking, what would a cure look like? And let's debate that. Let's argue about what's true, what's not. Let's try to quantify as best we can. Let's maybe run some tests and see what happens. But I don't hear a lot of that. So I'm just wondering if it's just part of our challenge is what's being amplified as opposed to what's real.
So it's an interesting thing. You've got two things I'd like to take a shot at. Number one, what's real is if you go through Disney World and Universal Studios, you go through metal detectors. You get patted down and have your bags searched. You never did before. So you're greeted with, "We don't trust you." You're coming through the door all at the same time. Some of you may be people here who will intentionally do bad things while you're here. And that's what I'm referring to. It used to be, it was missing that there was a possible a lack of safety. So above and beyond that, there's also brochures about behaving in the best possible way to ensure your highest level of fun or whatever it is. And that's where the hold hands, stay in the same group, let people know where you are all the time, check in frequently. So that's that. Now, in terms of what it really means, I wasn't really going there as much as if you've got, a diminished number of people going to Disney World now as compared to even after 9/11, there were tons of people that was still going to Disney World up through probably 3 years ago before COVID, right? So now there's just a different set of mentalities being brought into to the gates where my experience in 2007 through 2015 was if you go to Disney, you can forget about everything else going on in the world. There's just nothing to worry about. And it wasn't even something to have a conversation. The other thing that I wanted to mention to you, which has to do, I think I may have lost the bubble on it, but I think it has the $1 billion or however many billions of dollars. That's said by somebody who hasn't paid attention to the fact that the trillions of dollars that we've spent to correct all sorts of behavioral abuses and inner city problems and drugs and alcohol and all the rest of that, that money does not make the difference. The cultural mores and norms with all of the compasses, as Stephen Covey would say, pointing north, that people don't have to correct each other. They only have to slap somebody on the back for noticing that they did the right thing enough times. So one thing is if you're looking for other people to solve these problems, a new group of people that will be funded in the government to make these things work where they don't work now, I think that that's pretty well been proved to be a bankrupt idea.
Well, I guess, you can spend a lot of money on bad ideas. That doesn't mean that spending money on good ideas wouldn't be more effective. And as far as like metal detectors at Disney, frankly, that makes me feel safer because there's 400 million guns and Florida has permitless carry regulations, and one person walking in with a firearm could ruin a lot of people's lives, you know?
So
So as
Ken,
a business owner, I'd
making my
rather
point. You're making my
no,
point. If there's something to be afraid of always and everywhere, because there's something wrong around here always and everywhere. And in
well,
a
I don't
culture,
see it as being afraid or being wrong. I think it as just being sensible to the reality, and then making decisions as a business owner. If you go to an NRA convention, you're not allowed to bring a firearm in, to the
okay,
NRA convention. So there's obviously a risk mitigation put in place to do, it's yes, it would be great if you didn't need them and everyone was going to make safe decisions, but sometimes you have to make choices that it's the least
Ken,
risky of a bad series of choices,
will you help me here? I'm trying to understand what you're arguing for. I don't get your point. That's all.
Oh, well, okay. So what maybe I'm just hearing you wrong. What I'm hearing you say is that because there are now things in place in Disney World that didn't used to be, it's not the same experience as it was. So because now there are metal detectors, that's an indication that they're being overly managed in the rules that are being enforced, and that detracts from the experience of being in Disney World.
I didn't say
Is that
that
not
at
what you're
all.
saying?
No,
Okay.
not at
So then
all.
I'm misunderstanding what your point was
My point
in
was
the rules that
simply,
they put in place. And yeah,
no, you missed the whole point. Okay.
okay.
So I'm going to try it again. We grew up knowing that mom and dad could take care of us. This generation does not have that experience by and large. It's not intellectual, Ken. It's not reasonable. It's not with money or anything of that nature. It just is so that these kids that are being raised today do not grow up in a world that it's missing that there's dangers out there. I didn't have any kind of an idea that there were bad people in the world until we saw a news report on our black and white TV when I was probably 6 or 7 years old. And that was when my mom had the conversation with me about how to take care of myself and to make sure blah 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 blah. Kids are having that conversation when they're 2, 3, and 4 years old now. They show up for school, and the school is telling them everywhere they go, they're being trained that you have to be on your guard. And my point was, as for example, when you go to Disney, that used to be a place that was similar for me in terms of how I used to think my dad could take care of anything. I just didn't worry about anything because I knew my dad would take care of it. In terms of being in a place where they're going to charge you a lot of money for an experience, but you're going to love every minute of it, that was what Disney used to be. So I'm just saying, in our culture, those things are some of the symptoms and the evidence that we've reached the Stephen Covey having our culture where laws are unenforceable. That's all. Maybe we have.
Yeah, I guess I just it seems like as time goes by and generations change and population changes, I'm just not sure where number one those I mean that felt true to you, but was it actually true? I mean, if someone had walked into Disney with a shotgun and blown your dad away, would he really have been able to keep you safe, in the 1970s, so
Yes, but
there's, so I understand what you're talking about is the awareness, but it also seems like there's more
yes,
things that are
it's
of
the
concern
awareness
now that you
of
have
the
to.
awareness. It's the awareness of the awareness. It's not the narrative or the story or the next thing. It's called, we're always in a situation where things can go badly, whether we are or we aren't. It's that old saying that if you're on ice and you hear cracking sounds, you believe you're on thin ice. Why? Because the consequence of falling through the ice, and for most people that have experience with ice, go, that's just shifting, that's the story side of it. But what are the concerns that are not, that you can't mitigate? If you so so I think the conversation that we're having, and I'm not sure the intellectual argument that I think I hear you making has anything to do with all of the downtown city businesses that have closed because they've been ransacked every single day and put out of business, including Walmarts and jewelry stores and and bodegas and you name it. It's a different world is all I'm saying, and it has to do with whether or not our compasses are pointing anywhere close in a sufficient number to have a culture that works. That's all.
Yeah, and again, so I mean, I understand what you're saying about awareness. I work with kids every day, have for years, and they don't seem to be speaking to those things. It's very abstract. It's again, that feels inflated, like inflated. Like I would like to know how many stores are shutting down because they're being ransacked, how many are shutting down because, of economic stress or just demographic changes. I mean, those things happen too. So again, it's just to me, it just feels like there's risk in oversimplifying this and not thinking through, like, for example, what does a moral compass being instilled in an entire generation look like? How do you determine what that is, and how do you determine it in a way that doesn't violate, for example, a parent's right to instill an appropriate moral compass that might be different from their neighbors, but still allow them to also exist as a group? I think that's a difficult thing to answer, because what you may feel are priorities, even for that feeling of safety that your dad gave you, a different parent may want to create that environment for their child in a completely different way that you may not like or disagree or agree with. So, and I also wonder if a lot of this is just the nature of the acceleration of communication. I mean, social media and, the 24/7 news cycle. So you're just aware of things, I think, that we didn't used to be aware of because the information couldn't travel the world so quickly. So, I'm not downplaying it. And I think I understand what you're saying. I guess my point is I'm thinking through this like multi-dimensionally, and the fact that I'm curious about how much of what we think might be wrong is actually wrong, as opposed to amplified messages that support a certain worldview, you know? So, and how do we have conversations that allow space for everyone to have that? How do we decide, the metal detectors suck because it didn't used to need to be that way, and unfortunately it is right now. And until we resolve these things that led to that, we're kind of stuck with it. And won't it be nice if we can get to a place where they're no longer necessary? What would that look like? You know?
Well, yeah, and I think you're okay with everything that you're saying, and the standing back and critically thinking about whether it's true or not has never made any difference for somebody who's having a feeling. You know,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
so what I'm trying to say to you is that I don't know that we'll ever be in that situation again where kids, through a middle teenage really are sure that their dad can handle anything, right? Or whatever it is. It's different for different people. There are different things that when you notice that there's really nothing that happened, but you don't feel comfortable, you don't feel safe. And what you're not feeling safe to is information that you have received through many channels over many weeks, months, and years that are now kind of coming up for you. That's that being triggered. It's not something you vote on. Okay. It's something there inside of you that reacts under certain circumstances. So the point was, how do we get past and go back to and distinguishing about the languaging of different core values? I think we got enough experience with religions around the world and also cultures that worked, that they all were based pretty much on the same fundamental principles about, the whole notion of good and evil. um, the Ten Commandments versus the Code of Hammurabi, and versus, Confucianism and Buddhism, and all these things that basically say the whole idea of why do you take care of Mother Earth? Well, see, that's a core value, isn't it? Unless it's not being taught. And if you want to have Mother Earth being considered by people in their thoughts and deeds and mindfully, on a daily basis, you're going to have to install that there by being in that conversation, not have a conversation to correct things, is really all I'm saying. We're past the conversational stage, in my opinion. We're in the enough people need to do what needs to be done on a daily basis. No big whoop, no big talk about it or anything of that nature. Just be the change you want to see in the world. And so I may not be correct in my thinking, Ken, but I just want to express it in terms of, we're talking about the whole premise of this for almost 3 years now, is lighting a candle, which is to take an action, cast a pebble into the pond. Well, why are you doing that? Because it's how to amplify and spread the core value that you think is important for the world to see. And that's really where all this is coming from. So the next question was, I don't even know how we got onto all this, but I think it's fascinating that we did, simply because I know there's enough people out there in the world right now that are medicating daily. Substances, alcohol, pot. These are not necessarily, the behaviors that a culture that is, taking good care of its citizens and challenging them as wonderful human beings to grow. Those aren't what you would typically see, are they?
Well, I guess it would depend on, the lens that you view human history through. Like, someone told me that it was some ridiculous amount of liters of whiskey people drank, the average American drank before Prohibition. And it was like insane. Like, just the thought of it was like crazy. I mean, there was, drugs were rampant through the 60s, there's acid and everything. So, I always, I don't know. I wonder if there are similar, there are just common themes that re-express themselves. And I agree with you. I mean, the like talking to it's interesting to me that most young people are not interested in alcohol. They're just not. It's not something that's really a big part in their lives in the way it was in previous generations, especially socially, where that was like kind of a big part of the culture, and it seems to be shifting. So, so then does that mean we've evolved beyond the need of those external factors to make us feel good? Or have they just moved on to something else? You know, so and is it just expressing differently? And so and I agree. I mean, I also wonder about our ability to handle internally a very, very accelerated process of change that we're experiencing. Another thing someone told me was like that. I was talking to this really cool financial guy who, like, I was interviewing him for something, and he was saying that the net. I could have sworn that he said like the net worth of the planet that like 120 years ago was like $1 trillion if you added up all the assets, and now it's like 450 trillion, like a century later. So there's like this acceleration that we're all kind of trying to process. And and I agree, as individuals, if we can look at, like, to me, if my child, you know, doesn't feel safe in an environment, then me as a person, I can have a conversation with them about that and think about, what they consider safe. But then I might run into someone else who judges me for that and says, that's wrong. That's not safety. You're doing it wrong. So now I have a conflict because we have an essential disconnect on what we view as safety. There are people who send their 12-year-olds on the subway in New York City to go to school freely. And other people lose their mind about that, but they're fine with that. That's, to them, that city feels safe, that subway feels safe. So, so again, I'm back to like hearing everything you're saying and just recognizing the complexity of it. Even when you just choose to be the candle lighting the candle, other people are going to be threatened by that because it's either not the way they would light the candle, or they think you're lighting the wrong candle. And that's going to lead to something that they don't agree with. Now you have, and if those are the signals that get amplified, now you're talking about potential fear and consequences instead of looking for understanding, you know?
Yeah. So the last retort to all of that, because I think we're getting to at least a point where the language is shared, and we're not arguing with each other whether it's true or not, because I don't know if it's true. All I know is that it seems to be true, what Stephen Covey said about having a sufficient amount of agreement about what a culture's responsibility is and how to perpetuate that culture is the opportunity to not need laws. If it's less than that level of sufficiency, those laws are not only not helping, they're unenforceable. And I think the evidence that I'm seeing, without any analysis as to why, because I do have some ideas as why we're here. I think it's in some people's interest that things not be working very well right at the moment, and they get something out of this. And there is something coming that possibly will explain all of this after the fact. But the point is the question in my mind is there actually a sufficient number of people that would value having a culture that works, to put their own skin in the game and to be, part of the folks that are constantly, encouraging the right thing to do? Or are we in a generation where, like, the me first generation was the fall line for anything outside of my home doesn't matter anymore? And it's exaggerated hyperbole. However, if you look at people's behaviors, and I'm speaking, family members and that sort of thing, I'm seeing behaviors that would not have ever been either done or tolerated 50 years ago. And they're normal, or let's say usual, higher level of usualness than I've ever seen before personally or heard about. And the investigation into can we go back seems to say no, we have to go forward in a new way. And I would agree with you, Ken. Those conversations, how are those going to happen? What's going to cause people that are in a cycle of dissonance to choose another direction?
Well, poor Lisa has been quiet for a while, so I'm going to ask her that question. But Lisa, do you feel that in the spiritual circles that conversation is being had right now? Are there people looking at the work that they can do to raise human consciousness?
Because that's been my thought the whole time is just after saying going to the Parliament of World Religions. I mean, that's thousand and one of the ongoing themes too was like to walk your talk. It's not time for talk anymore. It's time for
Agreed.
action. I mean, that was really, really, really the ongoing theme.
Yes.
And my other thought is that, like do what breaks your heart or help what, that kind of process of where should my feet be walking. And so I'm still trying to decide that because everything breaks my heart. So, where do I put my feet? What ground do I stand on to try to support that kind of conscious movement towards a world that works for all, like we're saying, um, and it
But
may be oddly optimistic, or hopefully not oddly optimistic, but I still believe that there's a world that can be created that won't destroy ourselves.
I agree with you. And I also started off with a premise that I'm coming from is those compasses pointing have always been given to us by our faith and our religion first. And the families have perpetuated those beliefs through generation. They've come and they've gone in whatever numbers they do. But and especially here in the United States right now, we're at an ebb for participation in any communal religion except for Islam. As far as I know, Islam is the only one that is growing at the moment. Catholics, Episcopals, Jewish faith people, they are all punching down and becoming smaller. But I
But
think
there's a
that,
whole new crop of other spiritual
yeah,
centers, so
yep.
it's not organized religion perhaps, but like, and I agree with you. I think the families, the parents themselves are maybe not the ones actively giving the moral compass that the world maybe needs, but the kids are looking for it elsewhere.
Mhm.
So they have their mentors and they have their support groups and they have access to more people.
yes,
And they're finding it, and many of
Right.
them are thriving and flourishing under it. But it's funny. This is why I don't know if you guys saw. I started a blog. It's called the Ripple Maker blog, and I'm literally just highlighting people all over the world that I interview who are doing this kind of work, because there's a ton of them, and they are literally candles lighting candles, and they're coming at it from almost all of them were in some kind of more like established, they were scientists or they were in corporate America or they whatever. And then they just recognized that all of those skills could be better applied in a new way, in a forward thinking way. So they just went out entrepreneurially and they saw a problem and they're finding a unique way to solve it. And they're creating an impact, and they're just great humans. So all I'm writing about is less their work and more about just the good people who've just raised their hand to do what you're saying, Lisa, find their footing and just trust the fact that they'll just keep taking steps and missteps, but they're navigating in service, they're putting their skills in service to others simply because it's the right thing to do. It's a true moral compass. It's not necessarily, I mean, sure, it's it comes from all their experiences and the things we've learned. We all do, but they're trying to find that balance between what, the inside and the outside, and where it can do the best good imperfectly. They accept that, you know.
Well, I love what you're saying. It's a description of people who apparently have made a choice to do something in their own life and recognize that service is something we can do to acknowledge there's something greater than ourselves in the world, and to give of yourself to help a lot of people, in many cases, people you don't even know. That's it's a cool thing. I mean, and I think that community that's always been around religious conversations, because I've worshiped in Catholic church, went to a Baptist church for a little while. I went to for 15 years we were Episcopalian. But in our mid 30s, we decided we had not been to church. I hadn't been to Catholic church since I was probably 12 or 13 years old, been an altar boy. We just stopped going at my family. And Janet's situation was a little bit different. She went to church every Sunday, but she was a Sunday school teacher, so she never went in, for the regular service. So we had gone on a marriage encounter, and it was put on by the United Church of Christ, and it was really a wonderful 4-day situation. And we went church shopping afterwards. We wanted our kids to have their own free choice in terms of what they did later on. And in the meantime, of course, it spoke to us. We got really busy at it. But the point, right now is the government ever going to be in that business to have the citizenry, have their compasses point in the right direction? And also, can the languaging of a true moral compass, I don't mean to just pick on that, but I know there are a lot of people who think that if they act a certain way, that's going to get it done. But as Lisa said, the tongue in the mouth and the tongue in the shoe both have to be headed in the same direction. It's like moral compass is like being pregnant. You can't do it a little bit. It's either there or it's not. And that's completely missing for most people from this generation right now, which I think the conversation of any religious group can help with an awful lot. And if they all are coming from a good place, and most are, there are some that are not, okay? There are some that are racist. There are some that have to do with hate. And we don't hear about those very often until there's something that blows up in the news. But in the meantime, remember, we always used to have a pendulum. It would always swing too far one way, but it always seemed to self-correct. This has been the longest, in my opinion, that I've seen the pendulum swing out of control. I don't know which direction it's going anymore. And I mean, that's just me talking, but we're lighting the candle a world that works every week anyway, because it does work. And we're to that point. Do we have any wrap up thoughts here? I've just said mine.
I think I lost mine. Oh, I think the only, I don't know. I think Ken deals with a lot of kids still constantly. And I just don't want to see people say a whole generation has lost their moral compass. I mean, I don't think that's fair. And I think there's a lot of places where these kids are getting a sense of good direction. And I have nieces and nephews and godchildren, that are that kind of people. They're good kids, and they're in their 20s. So that's, but I just, like you said, Bill, though, I am going to continue lighting the candle. And I'm hoping at some point in the world, we won't be having to protect each other from each other. I mean, look at that's one of my favorite thing, not favorite, but my most scary thoughts is that the money, effort, and time that we spend just protecting each other from each other is insane. I mean, literally insane. So I would just like to see that reverse itself.
I was not going to say anything, but I completely agree with you. And just remember, it only takes 5% of people doing something other than what the other 95% know is the right thing, are doing the right thing, in order for them to change everything and make it undoable. And Ken, you've talked about organizational change. If you've got 100 people, you only have to get 3 doing the same thing at enough frequency that others start to do it, then others start to do it, then others start to do it. And so the point is that when we get to a place where I think the folks that are morally headed in a good place for the universe and the earth, where they are not afraid to come out and be that way and to demonstrate that and to provide that leadership to other people without fear of reprisal. It's a very interesting time to be concerned. And Lisa, I appreciate, probably more than you will know, how you have spoken about how you feel. And I feel kind of the same way. And I do see the good in the world for the most part, but I do see some things that really give me pause. Not sure how to act in order to make things. I may not live long enough, to be perfectly honest, to ever just feel, happy in my skin again, because I do feel like my grandchildren are my heart walking around out in the world. And so, having said all of that, now, Ken, it's your turn.
Oh, I'll just give Lisa a little bit of consolation. It's all anecdotal, but the kids that I've worked with and watched them over the last decade, they have values, they have clarity, they're passionate, and they fiercely advocate for themselves and others. And they absolutely have developing moral compasses that are dynamic and fluid because they live in a dynamic and fluid world. But I have the young people walking the planet that I'm interacting with right now give me a tremendous amount of hope for our future, period. So, and yes, there are exceptions, but the vast majority of them I find inspiring and empowering in their attitudes, their behaviors, their language, and their views. So, and maybe I'm in a bubble, but that's what I'm seeing from my little corner of the world.
It's my bubble.
God bless you for that. I think we're all in a bubble, aren't we?
Yeah.
Lisa, you got your bubble. I got my bubble. Ken's got his bubble. Ken's bubble is a fun one to hear about every week. I'll tell you that.
It's global now. I mean, this isn't just, this is Australia, this is the UK, this is Scotland, this is Germany. It's really, really cool, and I just, maybe it's just the pockets that I'm moving through because of the work that I do, but that's okay. Cause like you said, if this is the 5% and the rest of it is not what I'm seeing, so be it. I like the 5% I'm seeing, or whatever percentage it is. So,
yeah, exactly. However many people it is, you just want to remember.
I have no idea. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. The point is whatever conversation you're involved in, that's the conversation you're having. So if you're having a conversation for a world that works, that kids are great, and all the ones that are around you are reflecting that, and you're seeing that in yourself, it gives you more energy and more momentum to get back out there and keep going because it's working, right?
Well, and I'm not interested in just having the conversation with them. I'm interested in amplifying their signal. That is my 100% commitment, is turning the volume up so that they feel empowered in the belief to speak in a way that's going to allow those candles to light candles. So, and if they're not worth amplifying, then I don't, until they're ready. So, but I'm just trying to do my part to help them, raise their voices and be seen, for who they are and feel safe in doing so. So, yeah.
Well said. And I do that for older children.
There you go.
Yeah.
Most of my children that I work with are in their 40s to 60s. So, they're still kids. They still have fears. They still aren't quite sure what the right answers are.
Yeah.
And it's really fun to just help them you get through that door. I mean, all the ones that they've mastered age-wise, but they still haven't mastered life-wise. It's a beautiful thing. It really is. So thank you both again. I love you both dearly. I appreciate when we can agree with each other, and I appreciate when we have spirited language distinctions. And that's pretty much what it is. In the meantime, I also want to remind all you folks at home, we are lighting the candle, a world that works. And I'm going to ask you once again, sometime in the next 24 hours, will you please contact someone who you really care about and let them know, either by phone call or text or email, that your world works because they're in it and you appreciate who they are. With that said, bye for now.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. So I know we could go on with this line of thinking all day long, but I had to make a choice early on when I started doing consulting and when I started doing computer type stuff at scale. I realized that I could make desktop units in a large quantity and probably make somewhere around 25% gross profit margin on all of them. And I could sit down and I could do the math, and that would tell me what size business I would have, how many people would be assembling, testing, and all the rest of that sort of thing, installing, training, and what have you. Or I could shift my focus to being the best service provider and having people buy their equipment someplace else, and then take on large organizations and help them through the processes and all the things that we're talking about, the things that they don't know with regard to firewalls and security and just policies and procedures and what have you. And the numbers looked really awesome to me, and I was pretty sure I couldn't do it when I first decided to take on larger businesses. They're now going to expect more from me. And it's the same kind of a thing for a teacher. As Anthony Robbins went along, he started off and everyone could buy the 30-day, Awaken the Giant Within and all the rest of that sort of thing for $79.95 or whatever it was. And then before you know it, you're going to Fiji with him for a week, and that's $10,000 for the first weekend. So in terms of the scale part of it, I think he found it more rewarding working with rich people than he did with masses of people that could only afford $79.99. Although he's gone back there several times throughout his career, including now. I think he does an awful lot of mass stuff to build the farm. But anyhow, Jan, thank you very much for allowing me to just drone on. I appreciate that. And anything else to say, guys, to kind of wrap this up?
Well, I'm good.
No, this was fun.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you. And I'm going to leave you the same way that I always do, and that is to request that you go out. Let somebody in your life know that you're really glad that they're here. Text, phone call, email, knock on their door, whatever it takes. But please let somebody know that your world works because they're here. And in the meantime, we are lighting the candle, a world that works. Thank you very much, and bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.